The information in this podcast is not designed to diagnose, treat, or cure any condition and is for information purposes only. The views expressed in this podcast are based on my 15 years of clinical experience as a blood scientist. Please discuss any information with your veterinarian before making any changes to your horse's management. Welcome everyone to episode 113 of the Send Nutrition Podcast. You're with your host Bryan and Peter today. And today's episode is titled Blood Tests for Horses Simplified, Facts and Myths. How are you, Peter?
Brian, I've got a hat to wipe all the cobwebs off my microphone. I've been missing in action for a little while.
I've had Magellan babysit it and he's handed back the mic. We've had to lock a door, I think.
Yeah, she's trying to break the door down to get in for her next one and take my job.
It's good to have you back, and it's as usual. It's been a pretty hectic time at Sen, but we're very happy with everyone's support.
Brian, hopefully 113 will be lucky for us, and just make sure you don't get past the bottle shop on Friday the 13th.
It's nearly lunchtime, and it is Friday, so that's awesome. So this podcast absolutely well requested so many times, and I covered in an early episode, maybe over 100 episodes back before, and blood tests are most likely used when a horse is sick or showing symptoms. But today we're going to try and go through the common tests that are requested and try and simplify it so everyone can understand, just have a basic knowledge. We don't want you interpreting the blood tests and telling your vet they're wrong and everything like that, but it's just an open conversation about it. And we really value the questions that have been put forward to us, but we'll have an overview before that.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Brian. That podcast you did is almost older than Rome.
It was back in the previous warehouse. I think I had to tell the forklift drivers to stop reversing.
It was a bit echoey, wasn't it, too?
Yeah.
So for our listeners out there who sort of don't know, Brian sort of in his previous life was a blood scientist. Obviously, he's still qualified for a blood scientist, but he's full-time at SEN now for quite a while, along with myself. So Brian's actually done over 300,000 blood tests, obviously, with the analysis over his career previously with the hospitals that he's worked with. So he's a wealth of knowledge, and obviously his credentials are up there with some of the best. And look, we've got access to obviously Brian, and he does look at different bloods throughout the months and years and sort of weeks. We don't want to bombard him on Monday with 80 blood tests to read, so please don't send them all in one go. But yeah, with having Brian here, I think it's really good. We can do, like a Q&A. Maybe Brian can look for what he was taught to look for, his experience and knowledge that he's gained over the years doing human bloods. And funny enough, the human bloods actually are very comparable to horse bloods as well, yeah?
Yeah, 100% right, Peter. This is my jam. And when you look at a human blood profile and report and the testings, it's exactly the same or very, very similar to what we request for a horse blood profile. And it's an amazing comparison where I have drawn on my knowledge of human blood, then also studied the horse blood parameters and what we test for in relation to horse symptoms and conditions that commonly show up. And as we'll outline now, they are a great resource, but then there are a few myths and common misconceptions that can arise from blood tests that can make them useful, but also can be misleading in the wrong hands, and we'll elaborate that further.
Yeah, that's extremely well said. I know from a sort of personal point of view is when you need to get a blood test, whether it's sort of for yourself or for your animal. I mean, people are obviously on a back foot because it's like, well, you're only getting a blood test, most times or not, because the horse isn't 100%. So you're like, oh, geez, I hope there's nothing bad. So even if something might be a little bit out of whack, you're going to be, oh, geez, it's sick, it's this, and that. You're going to be panicking a lot. So I think what we're trying to do is, and Brian's done this previously in his previous podcasts about the blood, is that sometimes there's no need to sort of panic and sort of think the horse is going to fall over and sort of pass away. So it's more sort of setting the record straight a little bit, where slight variances might not mean what some people might think it does.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest lessons that I've found when working with vets and looking at bloods on horses is not to be overreactive to what you see the horse physically. So there's a reason why you took the blood tests, and if it can match up to the symptoms that are shown, that's a great confirmation. But if the symptoms shown and we don't know the cause, we can look at how the blood tests can indicate a certain body system, or is it a virus, or is it infection or inflammation through the body, And we'll go through those parameters in this podcast just to help people understand this. But just because the result is abnormal doesn't mean the horse is sick. That's another part to understand about blood tests.
Yeah, and we work with a lot of performance trainers as well. And look, some of those guys sort of routinely would be getting blood tests, whether it's, before an event, before a race or what so forth. And the horse to them might be looking 100%, but then the blood might be a little bit off. And look, some of these trainers, used to call up and sometimes still do, if they knew in a mad panic, I don't know whether I can compete, like the vet said maybe this or maybe that. And the horse is looking 100% in front of the actual trainer itself. So that's where I think those blood tests can actually work against you if you're sort of that panicky type. And unless you know the full profile of the horse, you've got a pattern of the horse with previous tests. Are there sort of levels naturally high? And I've picked up a lot over the years, obviously, since we've had the business with Bryan, because I knew nothing when we started about bloods, and sort of 9 years going into our 10th year next year, I've picked up a lot. And I'm not saying I'm a blood scientist, but when I see one and Bryan sort of shows me, 8 times out of 10, I'm sort of, Bryan will agree with me that we think, well, this is going on or this is not going on, because you get to see so many and there's a pattern.
Yeah, it takes practice. And when you familiarize yourself with all the parameters, like when you look at the blood test page, it looks pretty daunting. There's numbers everywhere. There's normal reference ranges. There's different parameters. So in the hematology and the biochemistry, and they're giving you a snapshot of the horse in time, the snapshot of their blood. If you get the results 3 days later from the lab, you have to transport your memory back in time to say, okay, these are the bloods 3 days ago. The horse may have fixed itself or may have developed its condition since that time. So always looking physically at the horse first and the symptoms, rather than leaning and treating on those blood test results back then in certain cases, is one of the most important things we like to keep in mind, because blood tests are not 100% accurate in many circumstances. And we will go into examples of this after we have that first little overview of what tests are commonly taken, and then breaking down each parameter to show you what it can show in the horse first, and then we'll show you the shortfalls of what it can't show you in the horse.
Yeah, extremely well said. So, Bryan, let's get sort of stuck into it. Let's just say we've got a new listener to us, obviously, or a listener that sort of is about to take their first blood test with their vet, and they just want to know sort of what to look out for. So maybe, is there any specific blood test that listener or that customer should request from the veterinarian?
Yeah, so most vets will guide you to a common blood test panel for an equine. When we look at, I might give them a plug. So QML Pathology, their vetnostics department. So they're on the East Coast here in Australia, and they have many pathology profiles. The equine biochemistry and the equine hematology is the most common one requested. And you can either opt in for a non-interpreted profile, so you won't get interpretation of the results, or you can go an interpreted profile, which costs a little bit more, and the pathologist will give you some interpretation of what's going on, and then the vet can make a decision from there. So you'll see those results and then those comments. So what is in the hematology and the biochemistry, and what are we trying to look for the horse? Firstly, hematology is your full blood count. So it's counting the red blood cells in the horse and also the white blood cells. So what are the red blood cells? So they transport oxygen from your horse's lungs all around the body, and then that's for all the body systems. They need oxygen to function. And then on the other part of this panel, you have the white blood cells, so the WBC, and these are broken down into 5 different white blood cell types. So this hematology panel, this first one, is really good to detect infection or inflammation in the body of the horse. For example, so we'll look at the white blood cells. So the common one at the top, the neutrophils, so it's NEUT abbreviation. This is actually a white blood cell that will go to the site of an infection of your horse. So say your horse has an infected part of the body and you see pus there and there's bacteria, the actual neutrophils will travel to this site. It's the first line of defense for the horse to fight the infection. It actually sucks up the bacteria into the cell and kills them inside the cell with hydrogen peroxide. So, Pete, our body actually makes hydrogen peroxide to kill bacteria itself. So it's like a first line defense.
I better not jump out and start drinking it myself just to give a little bit more. Hey?
I might call you Donald.
Donald. But just further on to that, that's where I think in that case, Brian, and correct me if I'm wrong there, this is where a veterinarian might look at prescribing antibiotics if the body cannot deal with the infection or if it's got too far ahead.
Oh, you're 100% right, Peter. So you'll see the site of the infection. You'll see pus, which is the neutrophils doing their job. They're self-destructing themselves by taking up the foreign bacteria, killing them with that hydrogen peroxide, and then to try and help the body combat this infection, then the vet may prescribe antibiotics on top, just in case the body can't deal with it naturally in its own defenses. So it's really fascinating, and like we could be here for another 11 podcasts trying to explain this whole panel, but I'm going to give you summaries of some of the ones that you may find interesting and the common ones. So another common one that we should touch on is the lymphocyte. So that's that next one down. So it's LYMP for short. And this is another white blood cell. They actually release antibodies themselves. They're actually a really vital part of the horse's immune system. And they produce these antibodies to attack invading viruses, toxins, and also bacteria. So your body has a really good natural immunity that can be built up and supported by nutrition. And these white blood cells are made when there's a foreign virus, bacteria, or toxin there to help stop the invasion and then also remove them. Because when even bacteria that comes into the body, these lymphocytes make antibodies to flag these bacteria, and then other white cells will attack them and try and remove them. So they're like a signaling thing for your body to help deal with sickness or infection like that. So when you look at the blood test panel, you have a normal range. So the reference ranges is where the levels of each of these blood cells should be between, and anything outside this range can be considered abnormal. Then you look at the big picture to see if it's an infection or inflammation that's happening. So looking at that lymphocyte example, if you see the lymphocytes raised above the normal range, so it might be highlighted in red, then you can say that the horse may have a virus or be in a viral load. And then the interpretation could even go further, and it's not as straightforward as this, because if the lymphocytes are still in normal range but a little bit higher, the horse may have been recovering from a virus as well. So as Peter said before, looking at the horse in its full physical state could mean where they are in their sickness or the condition that you're trying to test for or try and work out what's happening.
Yeah, Brian, so people with all that information, they've taken that on board. They're probably going, geez, I've got a headache. No, just joking.
Welcome to my years at uni as well.
Yeah. So they're probably going, geez, all this information, great. But they're probably thinking, all right, well, I really care for my horse. I don't want it to get sick. What could possibly be the root cause? So diet plays a big factor. So this is why we're very sort of adamant about, well, get your diet balanced. Make sure you've got vitamins and minerals. Brian mentioned there a keyword with the white blood cells about the immune system health. So if your horse is eating properly, it's getting exercised, it's not getting stressed, it's like its cortisol isn't going sort of through the roof, you're doing everything you can to keep that immune system in tip-top shape. So when it does get exposed to that virus or to that bacteria, as Brian said, the horse's body will heal itself. So by having it healthy before it starts getting sick, you've got more chance of it fixing itself a lot quicker without the antibiotics. And if you do have to reach out for the antibiotics, obviously that recovery might be even quicker because you're already starting with a very good foundation.
Yeah, that's really well said, Peter, because this first part, so the hematology part, is their first line defense, these white blood cells it's measuring for your horse. So if you have a very strong immune system for your horse, you've got sufficient trace minerals in particular in the diet on that daily basis, when a horse is put under stress, they can be more prone to infection, inflammation. You're going to give them the best possible tools to combat any foreign infections or anything in the environment that may affect them.
And that's like in human health, it's the same, like if we go on holidays and, we drink 8 bottles of wine in a 24-hour sitting and, wash it down with pizza and hot dogs and pies and everything else. I mean, I reckon I could last a week before I get sick. Louise used to come back with a sore throat and a cough coming back from holidays because it's, you let your hair down, you want to relax, you want to have a good time. But when you're here and obviously, you're trying to look after yourself, drink in moderation, eat very healthy. Very seldom would you get sick unless it comes into winter time or there's a big dramatic temperature drop. So what I'm trying to say is that if you're on top of your diet, you've got everything balanced, you're ticking all those boxes, chances are your horse might not get sick for a couple of years, because its immune system is so strong. It might be a younger horse as well, so it's got time on its side. The older ones are a bit more susceptible, so you can't really, cheat with the older ones because they do get exposed quite quick.
Yeah, and what we do see is when a horse begins its life, even inside the womb of a broodmare, the broodmare health and nutrition is so important for that developing immune system. Even taking shortcuts back then can really be detrimental further on in life. And that's the same in human health as well. We need exposure to, obviously, things in the environment, and we do get sick, but that builds our immune system up as well. But supporting it in the most natural way through a really good, strong nutrition profile is so important, particularly the performance horses.
Yeah, I echo those thoughts. And it's funny, I just had this thought come to mind. Like, I think in our first one, sort of how did Sen start? Brian and I sort of, were involved with a horse that just kept getting sick. Yep. And it used to be like every 2 or 3 months, whether it was viral, bacterial, and what so forth. And that's actually, that horse is why we're sitting here in front of this table today.
100%. It was what is supporting this horse's immune system in the diet. And Peter and I looked into this and we couldn't find some answers in Australia. We talked to top nutritionists in America and we found the building blocks that's required and the profiles that is required to help the immune system. And from there, that's where Sen was born.
Yeah, diet was a contributing factor that was missing in that particular horse. And with that diet, with that environment, the horse couldn't fight all those things off naturally, and obviously had to get antibiotics, had to get treatments and everything like that, and we sort of got to thank that horse for sort of sitting here, but it just sort of come to me now, Brian.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic to remember that. And I think when we look at these blood profiles, we have to really work with your veterinarian in terms of you have to trust their judgment. And when we look at this first part, the hematology, it is so useful in terms of seeing the amount of red blood cells that are there. You've got your white blood cells to your immune system. So if your horse is showing signs and symptoms of sickness, you don't know whether it's bacterial or viral, this can be a really good indicator if those neutrophils are up or if the lymphocytes are up. That ratio of the neutrophils to lymphocytes, it'll be skewed one way, and then your vet will be able to tell you with their professional knowledge that what the right treatment will be for that, whether it is turning to the medications or just trying to review your diet and making sure that the body has the ability or access to nutrients to help heal what's going on or stop the infection.
Yeah, well summarised. While we're on the hemoglobin and the white blood cells, so obviously the podcast is facts and myths. Let's maybe get into a small myth while we're on the topic itself, and this is what I sort of picked up, and Brian taught me to look at patterns and then look at the levels, like the ranges, and then see what the result is above the range or below the range. So what I've learned, and Brian might correct me here, is that let's just say you've got a hemoglobin in terms like the range is 115 to 175. Let's just say you're at 114 or you're at 176. So you're one under and you're one over. And some people might freak out and go, geez, like that's not good. But do you want to let our listeners know, Brian, what that means?
Yeah, so those results that are just on the edge of the normal range, they shouldn't be overreacted in the first instance. So when we look at even human bloods in the hospital, you'll always look at a history of this and not overreact on this. It has to be well below that reference range to have any action or be admitted to hospital. So when you do have abnormal results that come up on a blood test, we always would refer to the history of that horse or that human, because that result could be normal for that horse. It always runs in the lower range of the hemoglobin due to genetics, due to the environment. So it's like being your own scientist for your horse. And it's probably a good practice that when your horse is performing at their absolute best, you should take a snapshot blood of what's going on inside, because that's a good reference point to what is normal for your horse in particular. All horses are individual, and it goes for blood tests as well. And that's why these normal ranges are so wide. But it's probably a very good practice to have that blood test there to refer back on, because then when your horse is performing well, then when it's performing poorly, you could take another blood test then and compare them and see what are the differences, and is it due to the blood or is it due to something else physically or in the environment or anything like that. So there's a very good strategies when it comes to blood tests, and not to really overreact, as Peter says. Unfortunately, what I've seen in the industry and what Peter has seen is that some vets do overreact and over-medicate on this, not this particular parameter, but other parameters. So they can even flag results that were normal, but made them look like they were high, and then start prescribing or giving drenches when really the horse would have taken care of it without that intervention. And a better way would have been just taking another blood a week or two later just to see the progression of the condition. But then that's where we need to make good choices with our vets, and also look and know your horse inside out. And that's even going back on taking the bloods when your horse is performing its best, because then you have a reference point to show your vet.
That's a really good tip, to be honest with you. And we've done that. We've done it numerous times, and we've seen different customers of ours too, clients that have sent through. Brian's given his tick of approval. The horse has gone and competed and sort of won, and they're like, wow, well, now we've got a benchmark. And what I was saying with that, say even a hemoglobin range as an example. So if your horse is always, say you've got 3 or 4 bloods there to go off, if your horse's hemoglobin 3 out of the 4 has been at 170, so on the high side of the range, but on the 5th test it's come down to 120, I think that's when you sort of got to start like panicking a little bit. But if it's always been on the high side, you know, 170, 169, 174, 173, and then it goes to 176 on the 5th one, that's not a reason to be panicking.
No, exactly right, Peter. And just to add even more complication to this is there is another part to all these blood tests results, and that's the fact that they could be contaminated or affected by transport. So when you look at when blood is taken from the horse, it has to be stored in the right way in terms of not sitting in the sun, has to be transported to the lab in a particular time, because it needs to be centrifuged. So that means spinning and separating the red blood cells from the plasma. And if this is not done in time or left out in the heat or for a prolonged period, the red blood cells in that blood tube are still living, and they will use up more glucose in there, and also they can leach potassium. So this is going to give you inaccurate results of what's actually happening in your horse because the blood sample hasn't been handled correctly. So Peter's looking at me a little bit funny here, but we've probably had this conversation a lot of times in the office. You got to look at blood tests really open-mindedly, because they are accurate. But what is even more accurate is your physical examination of your horse, and then trying to work with your vet to come to an end diagnosis of what's going on.
Well, Brian, before you said that, if I was enjoying my second glass of Chardonnay, I'd want to scull the rest of the bottle after that one.
Because, like, I'm just talking from experience. So in the lab with the human blood in the hospitals, we would have to always look for, if there was a funny result that was out of character for a human, you would have to look at when was the blood taken, the time taken. Like, was that tube taken 16 hours ago and left on the bench in the ward before it came down to be spun? And it would have given all crazy glucose and potassium results. So there's all these patterns we had to look for contamination, improper transport or collection, the order they take the tubes in. So if the person taking the blood test for your horse takes the tube in the wrong order, it can put the anticoagulant in the other tube. So now I'm getting way into the science, but your vet should know, or the person collecting should know, the order of when to take the tubes.
Oh, look, 100%. And I think this is even more reason to not like just go off blood tests 100%. And like everything that Bryan's just said, it's exactly what we agree, because the thing is, all you need is out of that sequence that Bryan's just mentioned, I'm pretty sure there was like 6 or 7 different things that could go wrong. If you get one of those things wrong, like it's going to give a false reading. So now you're losing sleep at night thinking that your horse is going to pass away, where really like it might not be that severe. And that's the reason why it needs to get taken 2 or 3 or 4 times to see actually what the pattern is.
Yep, no, 100%, Peter. And we could go on for hours about this, because even the timing of collection of the blood is really important. So we'll give you an example here. In the blood test, you can test for an enzyme in the muscle. So it's the CK value, and that'll be in your biochemistry profile. So, for example, a trainer may be training their horse in the morning, and the horse may be a bit off, and they go, okay, I'm going to take some bloods at lunchtime.
After training, yeah.
After training.
Yep.
That can be a false reading of the muscle enzyme, the CK, because that CK, creatinine kinase, is leached out of the muscles and shows muscle damage. But when a horse is being trained, when you build muscle, you need to damage the muscle fibers to then build stronger muscles. So the right time to collect the bloods is before training, or even after over 12 hours rest post-training. But then keeping in mind, if they've had a hard workout, that CK value could still be elevated after that. And I've seen so many times the trainer will send the bloods and say, oh, this horse is tying up, or it looks like it hasn't handled the work. And I said, when did you take the bloods? And it was like a few hours after training. So you haven't given the horse time to rest and recover and give a true indication of the muscle condition. And that's when, a blood test can give you a misleading result. You think your muscle health for your horse is not good, and then you start reacting and giving medications or painkillers or something like that the vets may prescribe.
And we've actually worked with a couple of trainers that we've requested them to do another blood test, I think 3 or 4 days after they've taken the initial one after the work. And then I think in all the cases, 3 or 4 days later, the CK, which is the creatine kinase, is that how you say it, right?
Kinase, yeah.
Kinase has actually come down to normal levels. So that just sort of proves the point. But one thing I would like to add is that obviously with building muscle, and then that muscle sort of shredding, ripping and growing, when you've got a balanced diet, once again, you've got your fat, you've got your fiber, you've got your protein, you've got your sugar there, but it's not mainly sugar. That CK, in theory, should recover a lot quicker if your diet is balanced than if you've got too much of one thing and not enough of another thing.
Yeah, 100%, Peter. So we might move into the biochemistry side. So the 2 common tests for the blood test for horses that your vet will request is that hematology, which we discussed before, and then you've got the serum chemistry or the biochemistry. And the biochemistry is really useful to show the organ function of the horse, so the kidneys, the liver, the muscle health, also the electrolytes, and also hydration status in that respect. But there is also shortfalls for the blood tests in this part of the panel, and we will go through this. So what we have to remember is blood tests only test for what is in the blood. So what do I mean by that is, do you know that vitamins and minerals are stored in other parts of the body, not in the blood? So if you take, for example, magnesium, and it's actually one that gets a lot of people tricked with. So say Peter has his horse, he thinks there's a nervous issue and he doesn't think there's enough magnesium in the diet, and he pulls the blood, measures the magnesium, and it's low. That doesn't necessarily mean the horse is deficient in magnesium, because 99% of the total magnesium in the body of the horse is stored in the bones, muscles, and the soft tissues. So you've only actually measured 1% of the magnesium in the entire horse through that blood test. So that makes that test inaccurate and only gives you an indication of the magnesium that's circulating in the blood. So with all bodies, including horses, immobilizes the magnesium from the other tissues to help with muscle contraction and everything like that. So magnesium in a blood test isn't the most effective way to measure magnesium or to see if there's sufficient of magnesium in the diet. The best way is to ensure that you're giving the levels in your daily feed and then looking at the symptoms that show from there. So the blood test is not very useful in that case.
Geez, Bryan, you've kept that secret pretty good to yourself. I only just found out about now. So that's,
it's fascinating that blood tests. It's fascinating and frustrating because you want what's best and you want to find out what is good for your horse and what reflects it, but because we're only measuring blood, it's not we're not taking a bone biopsy, we're not taking a muscle. They store it in there and then they mobilize it and use it in that sense. And it's exactly the same for potassium as well. There's like 98% of the potassium is intracellular, like in the muscle, skin, subcutaneous tissue, but then also in the red blood cells. But that's not as accurate as, say, sodium. Sodium's pretty accurate. What you see is what you get there. But when you look at the whole profile picture of hydration in particular, okay, you'll look at your electrolyte, sodium, potassium, chloride. If your horse is showing the signs of dehydration, so you're doing the pinch test and also the gum test, and it's showing those signs that may be dehydrated, you pull the bloods, look at the electrolytes, but also look at the protein and the albumin. So when a horse is dehydrated, there's less liquid or liquid volume in the bloods, and it'll actually show that the albumin is high. So that's a good indication of dehydration.
Bryan, we know for a fact that many performance horse trainers, a lot of our clients used to do this as well. They even add a potassium supplement on top of what's already in the feed. And if you're saying that it's only, a couple of percent that the blood test is actually showing, to me, that's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, it's crazy because we know that pasture and hay has heaps of potassium.
More potassium than probably what the horse needs.
I think when we walk into a lot of performance horse trainers, they were adding potassium on top of everything.
Correct.
When it should have been the opposite, which we did correct them. Sodium and chloride was really more important to balance.
But can you see why it makes sense now? Because they would have probably done whatever blood tests on their horses. Correct. Oh, geez, potassium's low. The vet said give it potassium. Yep. They didn't tell them that it might be a 5% marker out of the actual potassium of the horse's body where it's getting stored.
Yep.
So now they're going to be adding it daily because they think, oh, geez, we can't go without potassium. And now there's too much potassium. It's unbalancing all the other minerals. And now the horse has got to try to balance it inside, excrete what it doesn't need, store what it does need.
Yep.
And it's like the Colonel's herbs and spices.
You're better off not looking at the blood test.
Wow.
But yeah, you're just putting an unnecessary load on the kidneys in that sense. But we have to go by our knowledge of our nutrient profiles in our diet. So what we do know is our roughage has plenty of potassium for that daily intake. Our feeds, they don't have added potassium, so it's what is naturally occurring in them. So there's a level there. And that's why we recommend adding salt, so sodium chloride, to balance up those electrolytes. And then you look physically at the horse itself.
I'm sure our listeners are saying you've just scared the crap out of us. Like, what are you trying to do? And they're probably thinking, all right, well, most people reach out for the supplements when there's a problem, when a horse gets sick or when it's deficient in this, when it's deficient in that. What's the solution? Feed a balanced diet every day. Feed the vitamins, feed the minerals, feed the salt, get your protein right, get your fat right. If you're going to be doing it daily, and it's not just a plug for our products, this is actually common sense. When you're going to be doing it daily, you're not going to run into any deficiencies. It's only when people maybe they don't know, they've been told some bad information. Oh, well, you don't need this, but you do need this. It's only when you get into that, Johnny said that, Sally said that. Unless you've got a balance and you know whether what your pasture is, what sort of type, what type of hay you're feeding. Is it a high sugar hay? Is it a high phosphorus hay? Is the calcium low? Is it high? This is what we do at Sen. We help you balance the diet. So by actually going and doing the diet analysis or feeding the vitamins, minerals daily, you're going to be less prone to creating an imbalance. And how long does it take to create an imbalance? depending on the horse and depending on the performance. Like a racehorse might get an imbalance a lot quicker because it's sweating and it's working a lot harder, where you've got a dressage horse, it's not doing as much work. So the imbalance might take a lot longer to develop, but it will develop if something is deficient. And the body is great at trying to compensate. It tries to get calcium out of bones if it's deficient and all these other different things. But do you really want to be sort of playing with fire with that deficiency? Most people don't know that they've got a deficiency until the problem happens. And this is why we do these podcasts, to try to educate the end users to actually go, well, look, this is what might be happening. Don't just think a blood test is going to tell you everything. And look, I've learned 2 things today from Bryan as well that I never knew. And, he did well to keep that a secret. So our listeners are learning as much as what I am today. It is his jam, as he said.
And that's why there's so much education for the scientists with the blood test interpretation, because it's not straightforward. You're giving advice to an animal or even a human that the body is always trying to even itself up with the stores it has in the body, and you're just getting that blood test result and the snapshot in time of what's happening in the blood, but you might be looking at a condition that doesn't even have any relation to the blood. It might be the muscle, it could be a totally different part of the body that the blood can't show the indication that there's a deficiency.
And that's why I think what we said at the beginning of the podcast is use your horsemanship to look at the horse. You're with the horse every day. You're going to see signs of change. Like if you're with them, you're riding them, you're going to feel that, well, they've got more energy, they've got less energy, they're very lethargic, they don't want to do it there. You will know as the owner of that horse when you spend enough time with them. And I think obviously if something drastically changes, for all means, go out and do that blood test, get it interpreted by someone that's qualified. Bryan's given a bit of a rundown with the ranges. Don't panic if it's a little bit over or it's a little bit under. Look at the patterns that horse has had. If it hasn't had a pattern and it's your first horse, start with one, maybe do another one a week later or 2 weeks later to see whether it's actually fixed itself up or whether it's still in that state where it's not 100%.
I don't want to alarm people, but
Bryan, you have already.
Sometimes blood tests are not 100% accurate to what it's trying to measure as well. So that number is an estimation of what has been sampled from the horse, and the efficiency of, there is some error in that level. It's giving you an indication to then apply it to the actual symptom or condition that you're seeing with the horse.
So it should be used as a guide pretty much.
Yeah, correct. So for example, like vitamin E and selenium, you have to separately request those tests to get the levels for the horse. But then also the accuracy of that test, there is some shortfall. So it depends on the amount of fat in the horse that the horse is ingesting or the makeup of the body. So there's a lot of degrees of error that can happen when trying to get that result or trying to obtain that result. On the other hand, Peter and I have been through this a lot of times, is the iron level. So my horse is a bit lethargic and I should try and get their iron tested. Well, if you get an iron level tested in the blood test.
That's the ferritin, yeah?
Oh, no, so ferritin is the storage form of iron. So the iron is what's the iron in the blood, but the horse is trying to store the iron to use later. So then if you're just measuring the iron and it's low in the blood, but they've got heaps of stores, the body's still trying to get it out of the stores. So then
is it a false
it's
reading?
Another
pretty
false
much
reading, because then the horse owner thinks the iron is low. I'm going to give it even more iron, which we don't need to because they've already stored it.
And I think there's only one lab in the United States that actually does
a more accurate reading, full accurate reading. Because I was shocked that it's not very accurate.
Is there anything in the serum chemistry that is actually accurate what's in the blood? Like, I'm sure people are thinking about the protein. We haven't sort of summarized that one. Is the protein snapshot pretty much as it is? Like if it's low or if it's high, would that be an accurate reading on the protein?
Yeah, so protein is pretty accurate because there's no storage forms of protein in the body. The body will use it to build its body systems from that and support the body. So protein's a good indicator whether you've got enough or too little in the diet. And it's also a good indicator with that albumin for hydration. So if If albumin is high, which is a type of protein, then it can suggest that you should look at your electrolyte levels. The amount of water your horse drinks should be at least 30 litres a day. And it's all about knowing your horse in these aspects of that.
Bryan, do you want to summarise pretty much what we've just gone through, which has been a lot? And look, I'm sure some of our listeners are onto the third bottle now.
I hope that everyone has been able to follow. And like, we could do another podcast if you got even more questions, and we're going to address the ones in the users group in a second. But I think, as we touched on before, looking at your horse physically, looking at the conditions and the symptoms, doing the blood test, looking at that snapshot of what it is showing. It could be simply straightforward and showing that there is an infection, whether viral or bacterial, could be inflammation. It could show the condition of the organ, so the kidneys, liver, the muscle, whether you've worked your horse too hard or they're not recovering quick enough with the muscle marker. Also allergies, so one of the white blood cells will show that, but you should talk to your veterinarian about this. So the general blood test can be a good guide to then work out a treatment for your horse or management for your horse. But overall, the theme about this is ensuring that the correct nutrient profile is going into your horse. So leaning on the right levels and ratios, in particular the trace minerals. And then if you have this down pat and the horse is still showing symptoms, conditions and signs, then look for further treatment or environment factors that may be around.
And from my end, sort of what I picked up today, which is a brilliant tip Bryan gave, when you've got your horse that's absolutely impeccable, like it's performing its best, it's looking its best, like you've never seen it that well, it goes sort of reverse psychology. Take the blood snapshot then when it's perfect, not when it's at its worst, because that'll give you a good snapshot of when it is at its best. And if you ever do need to do the blood test when it's not at its best, you're gonna see the difference of where it was at its best and where it is at its worst.
Yeah, correct. But it makes me think, like, when it is performing at its best, you get the blood test results back and there's something a little bit not normal. Don't overreact. Don't panic. Talk to your veterinarian. They'll be able to guide you, but have a listen to what is accurate or what is inaccurate and what you should be looking at as the horse physically first, and then looking at your blood test.
It's, as you said, it's a rabbit warren, and that's a valid point. So, you've just gone out, you've won a 160 kilometer endurance event by 4 hours, and something's off in a blood test, and you're going, well, geez, I could have won it by 8 hours if that one marker was good. Yeah. So valid point. Once again, look at the horse itself. You're with it every day. If it's not showing any signs and symptoms of disease, fatigue, ill health, just maintain as you're going, because it can really confuse you. And once you go down that rabbit warren, it's very hard to get out.
Yep. And also, we should add that horses are very rarely anemic for the reason why humans are anemic. So humans would be the lower absorption of iron and they feel fatigued. In horses, this is rarely seen because there is iron everywhere. It's abundant, it's well absorbed by the horse. The only times you'll see them anemic is if they've had blood loss during surgery or severe internal bleeding somehow with a high grade range of chronic ulcer conditions. So when you look at these blood building supplements that contain high amounts of iron, it really is not beneficial for the horses. And a more even trace mineral that includes zinc, copper, and the profiles that we promote daily in the Sen feeds and supplements is a better way to do it and a safer way. And don't be caught in the trap of thinking the horse is anemic or fatigued for that reason.
Well, in the 9 years that we've had the business, and obviously the bloods that we've seen, which isn't really a true indicator, but we've never seen a 9 level that's had a horse anemic.
No, correct. Or the hemoglobin. It's always due to, say, blood loss after surgery or something like that, and it returns. I think I may have seen one, but it hasn't been in those double figures. It's always over 100, and then it's corrected by rest, repair, proper nutrients, and some medication to help with comfort. But it's not something you see wildly as common as in human blood.
Okay, awesome. Well, that's very well summarized. Bryan, we better get into the questions from the users group. So if anyone listening is not in the Sen users group, please search on Facebook, send your request. We'll approve you right away. I think we've got about 4,500 users in there, so the tribe is growing. I'll go through the questions. Bryan put a poll out about what to ask, what our users would like Bryan to answer in the podcast. So I'll go through, I'll just go through with the first names of each individual that asked the question, and maybe Bryan just try to summarize it pretty quick. Otherwise, we'll be here till midnight without a gin. So I'm thirsty already. So the first question comes from Rochelle. Types of blood tests to request, please.
So this depends on the condition that you're confronted with. So in general, I would be just doing the general screen for, like, say, a general sickness or fatigue. So you would just be the hematology and the biochemistry. So that's a basic panel, and that's what we went through today. If you want more specifics, like the vitamin E or selenium, or even for any metabolic problems or like Cushing's or PPID, you would be looking at like ACTH. But your general blood test panel is going to tell you a lot of things. There is a new marker called the SAA, and that is more of a non-specific inflammatory marker, which is helpful. So all that just tells you is there is general inflammation in the horse and the horse is sick. So that's a pretty good indicator, but you'll have to determine that on what the vet findings are for your horse and their condition.
Awesome. Sasha would like to know, how close to an event should I get the blood test done on my horse to get the best results?
Yeah, so when you look at blood tests before an event, probably the week before, because then you have time to correct or look at the condition of the horse. It can be another catch-22 where your horse has been training amazing, you're all like happy with the horse's condition for the event, and then you take the bloods and you find something that's maybe a little bit out, and it could be mentally not good for you, especially because you'll be thinking about what ifs going into the event. But yeah, it's probably 5 days out, 6 days out. Have a look so you got time to correct if you need to. From that, it'll give you a good sign of where he is. But I think the most important thing is infection and inflammation. So if those markers are normal, going into the event in the best possible condition for the horse, then you'll be rest assured that they're going to reach their ability, and then all your training is paid off. So yeah, 5, 6, 7 days before.
Well summarised. Elle's got a laminitic horse that isn't getting any better. What bloods should she look for? So
after you've done all your tests for laminitis, so in terms of that diagnosis with PPID, with the ACTH and all the metabolic markers, if the horse is not getting any better, it has to come down to the nutrient intake and the profile, because the bloods are not going to change the horse. You've got to change the horse's blood or via a better nutrient profile or environment, or if there is a medication that the veterinarian has indicated, then they may have to test it. So it's a bit of trial and error with the horse, as they're all individuals and there's no sort of blanket answer. So bloods are not going to tell you too much with this laminitic horse, because what's more important is the symptoms they're showing. If they're showing the signs of lameness and you can see the symptoms of laminitis there, then you have to really double check your forage intake, whether it's low sugar, low starch, the time of the day they're grazing, then making sure the foundations are 100% grain-free, no hidden ingredients there that may give the flare-ups, and all the sen range is laminitic friendly. So it's more looking at the nutrient profile, not the blood test.
Awesome. Erica would like to know ulcers and blood tests, if there's any correlation.
So ulcers, the only way to know that a horse definitely has ulcers is through a scope. You can't tell from the blood test, although some vets may tell you they can, but definitely a scope first. But also from a blood test, you would only see an indication of bleeding, but when you look at the whole signs of the blood volume, you would need a lot of ulcers bleeding inside the horse to really shift that. And you'd actually see other symptoms that would come through. So for ulcerative effects, blood tests are not that useful. It would only back up what's in a scope. and then see where it is. But what's most important is your forage intake, that 1.5 to 2% of their body weight in low sugar, low starch, grassy hay, minimal lucerne. Also the times before the ride and on transport, but then also getting their gut health right with the proper foundations of high fiber, a good fat source, omega-3 fat source, and then also managing their stress levels in the environment. So that's probably more important than the blood test with ulcerative effects.
As we say regularly, prevention is better than cure. So if you, as what Bryan mentioned, get the roughage there, make sure it's a diet full of fibre. You're going to be well on top of those ulcers through a diet alone. And then obviously, if your horse has ulcers and then your diet isn't right, the healing of those ulcers, even with medication, is going to be a hard battle and a very expensive one as well.
Yeah, we would love that a blood test would say yes or no, ulcers or no, and that might come in the future with a specific marker, but not at this time.
Marsha would like to know if there's a test to show the well-being of a horse.
So that general panel, so the hematology and the biochemistry, is a good panel to see the overall look of the horse. So it's going to pick up, as we said before, inflammation, infection, the body system conditions of the horse's kidneys, liver, muscle health, also like that hydration status as well. So when the horses are a bit off, looking at the bloods can be beneficial. They'll give you the markers straight away, but if everything's normal, then you'll have to look at the horse physically and try and get to the bottom of it, whether there's something structurally wrong with them, and then you'll need that bodywork treatment, or maybe there's something in the environment that's affecting nutrient absorption, or also double checking the nutrient profile of your diet that you're providing the horse.
And Sarah's our lucky last. Very similar question to Marsha. She also said, is there anything there to look for, even if it's like a basic explanation, which is very hard to get a basic explanation. But I think what she means is there anything in a blood test to look for without getting too complicated, any basic things? What comes to my mind is the protein, because obviously we know that that's a really good snapshot. So if your horse is deficient in protein, you might need to up the protein. If you've got too much, you might need to back it down.
Yeah, and that could indicate that the kidneys are working well too, because they're excreting protein. So making sure the diet has that sufficient amount, even in performance horses, and that later stage of the broodmare third trimester is important as well. But if I take a blood test for a horse, it's just looking at whether there's an infection that is slowing its performance, whether there's unnecessary inflammation, so there's inflammation markers. It's not specific. It can't tell you where that inflammation is in the horse. There's no map in the blood that says that, but it can give you a good indication there's something not right, so that warrants further investigation physically, and then trying to work backwards and keep the horse in good comfort from there.
Sodium, obviously sodium.
Sodium's good, a good marker.
Electrolytes.
To see if you're giving enough salt in that respect. Potassium, as we said, not so much. But looking at it overall, you can see the kidney function, the liver function. Then from there, the blood will give you that indication. Then you've got to look at the adjustments that need to be made in the nutrient profile, the environment, and even other external factors that may be hindering that horse. So stress can really play havoc with that gut microbiome, which then has an effect on the immune system. So then you start going down that rabbit hole for each individual horse.
Out of all those markers and with all the levels and everything there, it's for me, it's fascinating that you can really only use maybe a quarter of that to actually get an up-to-date, on-time snapshot of where your horse is, where with the other ones, there's a lot of factors that are very variable as well.
Yeah, 100%, Pete. And I think it'd be nice if they wrote a handbook that would spell that out. But overall, you have to lean on what the lab interpretation is from the pathologist there, and then look at what the vet comments, and then come up with a treatment option for your horse that you feel comfortable with.
And if anyone does want a second opinion, Brian's going to be in at 4:00 in the morning on Monday. So if you wanted to send like 800 blood test results, he'll be here for 18 hours on Monday doing them all and getting back to everyone one by one.
The people who have access to my number feel free.
Just call him on the mobile.
I will be looking up to see if you're a certain customer. But I, at the end of the day, we're trying to be there and helpful for the horse because we want them as happy and comfortable. And basically, Peter and I, we're trying to promote proper foundations in nutrition, which is going to help blood test results overall. I find it fascinating that the blood tests are so good, but then can be so misleading. But at the end of the day, look at the horse physically and get them mentally right as well. And then you're going to be one step further ahead of helping them combat any sickness or conditions that may arise.
Bryan, I don't know whether we've helped or hindered our listeners on today's podcast. It's probably one of the only ones that I'm on the fence with too, you know what I mean? We've tried to help, but I think we've probably put more doubt in their heads than what they probably wanted to hear.
I totally agree, Peter, because we're just trying to be honest. I could say, this will give you this result correlates with this, but there is so much in terms of science behind this. So I've seen blood under the microscope. It's kind of really artistic interpretation when you look at the slide and look at these red blood cells, these white blood cells, the changes that happen into them. They're always changing. The body is always trying to balance itself, and then it's trying to balance itself to survive. So if you've got a deficiency, like as Peter said, calcium deficiency, then it's pulling calcium from the bone. That makes bones weaker. That's just a simple one, but it's happening all around the horse's body. And what we do know is just ensure that the nutrient profile that you're giving the horse on a daily basis is up to scratch. So then you don't have to start frantically over-supplementing something in the future.
Yeah, 100%, Bryan. Look, I think we've gone over time with this one, so I'd like to invite anyone that's not on a users group. As we said previously, I think we're 4,000 and growing. A lot of active users there asking questions. Bryan and I are both in along with Magellan. We've got the diet consults as well. I think there's a bit of a backup now. Yeah, it might be 8 weeks or 7 weeks or something like that. If it's anything urgent, just please call us. Yeah. There's myself, Bryan, Magellan, and Jasmine as well in here. One of us will be able to take your phone call. We can sort of do it on a spot there. If you're listening to Spotify, please give us a 5-star review. I think I've noticed we're up to 37, which is not like Joe Rogan, but we're heading in the right direction. So Joe, look out.
Well, we're heading to 100,000 listens, so that's a little bit of an achievement itself.
Yeah, that's throughout through Apple, Google, everywhere. Spotify. Yep. So we'll have to have a party when we hit 100,000. It's actually gone better than what we thought, and we love doing it too. We're slowly starting to run out of topics, so if anyone could email us or a messenger, send us any topics you'd like us to cover, we'd appreciate it.
And this might not be the last blood test podcast, and it could be just a straight up Q&A for the next one. But that's a good overall summary without going too sciencey, because we could talk for hours about the science behind each parameter, but we don't feel like that's useful. We want a practical example, and hopefully you guys have found this very informative.
I think that wraps it up, right?
Yep.
We'll see everyone again next week.
Okay, thanks.
Cheers,
guys.
Bye.
Yeah.